previous slide is to just build up a framework of understanding how relevant is it when you have a worldview. How does your worldview view the idea of existence? Same applies to now the sources of what guides you in that aspect. For us, we share the same perspectives. We share experiences. Everybody agrees experience is very, very important. God has given us intellect. We need intellect definitely to do the kind of work we need to do. We need tradition. We need history. We need passage of experiences or stories of the past also. And then to an extent, you have an innate nature in which God has put inside us, unique to us. There's a reason why some of us prefer to do plumbing work, and some of us prefer to just be academics. There's certain qualities that God has put in each one of us that we're passionate about. They're passionate about podcasting, passionate about just teaching, passionate about leading, passionate about sharing thoughts. You understand? That exists within us. From the modern worldview, it's not centering revelation and the Quran, or Revelation and any of the past scriptures. Why is that so? We need to understand some of these things. So pretty much a very fundamental aspect, which is over 50 to 99% of what we take seriously, is not being taken by the modern worldview of most people around us. And when we mean most people around us, even Muslims are imbibing these kind of tenets, basically calling themselves Muslims, but you're not seeing them interacting with scripture very well. And so we need to now understand what is going on. You understand? Why is this going on one way or the other? Well, the historian in me cannot keep quiet. So when I look at certain things, you need to interrogate yourself, and then you go back and realize that certain things happen for a reason. The history of the West begins, of the modern West as it is, begins way back after the wars of Europe. Familiar names that we should learn is people like Martin Luther. Martin Luther, not the king, but the Reformation era is very fundamental to how we see things today. Prior to the Reformation era, we had the Renaissance, and the Renaissance brought in cultural ideas. We'll talk about that more. It started off in the 14th century. In the 16th century, and we're talking about the 1500s, if I'm not mistaken, we had the Protestant Reformation. Today, we have Catholics and Protestants in our communities. They don't just exist from a vacuum, especially if you're residing in an African community. They broke away, and the likes of Martin Luther came out and said, you know what, we've had enough is enough. You people are having gospels. Some of these gospels are not led by God, but you're having absolute level of authority to govern us and to do things the way you like. You understand? Does this make any sense? Think of it in this way for us Muslims. God has told us to reflect in the Quran, to look at the signs of the Quran, and then we should read the Quran. The Catholics, prior to this era, said the audacity to even read the scripture for any reason whatsoever lies in the hands of the church, lies in the hands of the authorities, the papal authorities in general. So imagine, between the era of Jesus until for 1400 years, people had no access to scripture one way or the other. It was confined in Latin, confined to the domains of a certain authority. All over Europe, everybody's just looking at the Vatican and depending on the Vatican, and everybody is just submissive. So the Vatican declares crusade, everybody just go out for crusade. They declare certain things, everybody just obeys. There's corruption in the land by the church itself. Everybody cannot say anything. You just have to submit. Martin Luther decides that no, he's not just going to do that. He's going to translate the Bible. And he translates the Bible, and he does that because he tries to empower the human significance in people, tries to empower the human autonomy in people. Imagine this kind of thing. Just think about it. The power of tadabbur is very, very important to us in our religion. Yet, a lot of us are not even looking at it. And it's just, the Quran is just having shells, except for outside of Ramadan. But these people are begging for over a millennia to have access to their scripture. We just need to just conceive of that kind of idea. From there onwards, anyway, let's fast forward to it. the wars of Europe happened. So what happened because of this? The princes, Martin Luther allied with the princes, and so the nation states that you're seeing fragmented today, whether it's England, Spain, things like that, France, like that, they were all united under the leadership of the Vatican Church, but they were princes. With Martin Luther coming out, these independent states developed themselves as independent autonomous states. What does that mean? It means that the religion of your king is the religion of the state, period. That is it. So imagine you are now going with this kind of mentality. Hence, you see the likes of King James Version. King James Version Bible comes in as a result of England now having a version of the Bible that you can understand, basically. Every other pocket like that, having their own separate kind of things. And so you can now see the sects, the Calvinism, Anglicanism, Lutheranism, that happens in that way forward. You now fast forward to another, let's say, 100 years, America is born. How did America get its own independence? America said, well, we cannot be doing this kind of authoritative kind of business also. The England, we cannot submit to you. You understand? This is slowly how the states were born, one way or the other. The idea of the nation state is the first state that is birthed under certain ideas, which we're going to speak forward. So what I'm just trying to point here is that there's an evolution of ideas that started because of certain levels of trauma that happened, because certain levels of bid'ah that Christianity promoted for a millennia. And there's so much story that can be discussed about it, the level of, we know how backwards Europe was compared to the Islamic societies, such that we had to give them some of our resources, which you will see later. Some other books and materials are going to talk about this. So I'll put a pause to this for now and then move forward. But this is how nationalism, the point we're trying to make is that secular states and secular nation states emerge from a point in history in of themselves. And so we're starting with the discussion on liberalism. When we're talking about liberalism, we should remove any ideas of liberals versus Republicans. In fact, they are all together under liberalism. Under liberalism, Republicans are claiming that they are much classical liberalists than the other guys that are claiming the name liberals. So that is even what liberals are distinct. They are all one body because they are rooted in the same tradition, the same constitution, basically. But before we go in that far, let's talk about what inspired the American Revolution and making the American democracy one of the most successful, basically, in which can be modeled by even the rest of Europe, ironically. When in the 1500s, during the wars of Europe, there was trauma. So somebody by the name of Hobbes comes and says, okay, it's philosophy time. How are we going to solve this problem? So just think of this in this context, for example. Imagine the Kirigi Wars of the 1800s also in Yoruba land, where different factions could not agree and come together basically on anything. So somebody now says, okay, we have to solve this problem. If Modakeke, they are not seeing eye to eye. Oyo, Abeokuta, everybody. We have like 6, 7, 8, 9 different factions, although split in different groups, but they are facing themselves. How do we solve this chaos? People are killing themselves. There's 30 years of European war leading up to the Treaty of Westphalia. So the Leviathan is an idea that Hobbes comes in and says, you know what? All of us are in different factions right now. Can we just say, let's just agree that we'll just have that one guy, that one king, you understand? Or one leader like that we'll submit some of our rights to, because everybody now is an Oga at the top. You understand? Everybody has their own community now. But we'll get that protection of our respective communities in return. Now, just imagine Europe right now. Many small countries. This is how they were thinking at that time. We have too many different factions, too many different disunity. What do we do to bridge the gap because of this civil war? So it arises from a point of civil war that has already held and crippled Europe to a very deep extent while the Renaissance was happening. Cultural evolution was happening as a result of a slide I will show you next very soon. Now, as this is happening, John Locke comes out a few years a few years afterwards, let's say maybe 50 years afterwards, and this is in the 1600s. I believe this is before or after the English Civil War, one of the English Civil War, which, because within these countries also, they were having their own internal civil war also going on. The elites were not liking the monarchy of England. So everybody, the way the Church of England and other churches were able to break their own independence from the Pope, other people too wanted to like tame the king also. So John Locke is here and says, you know what, rather than us saying that we're going to give somebody our right to protect us and then still have that kind of king mentality, no, it's the other way around. Look at it. First, we empower ourselves. We are people to be served, hence emphasis on individual rights. And then he now adds protection of private property, because by and large, if you live in these kind of societies, and that time the king is the one that owns most things at that point in time, he governs, he leads. You have to seek certain permissions before you get certain things. And so Locke is now coming and saying that, okay, you have a natural right, comes in with the idea of natural right. And for me, from a Muslim perspective, the way I'm seeing natural right today fits more as, okay, a continuity of what you know you deserve to live, basically. It's not just maybe fitra, but just saying, okay, we deserve to eat today. We deserve to have a house today. You understand? We need to go to the market. You should not have to just stop me and just tax me just like that. You understand? But the role of government, when we're putting in a government in power, the government exists. We're now empowering the government to protect these rights. It's not to become a lord over us. Hence, the idea of limited government in the way the Republicans understand today now comes, where the power is constrained by the rule of law and the separation of powers. So the idea of the three arms of government, executive, judiciary, and co, is written by John Locke in the Treatise of Government. So these things are things that we take not too seriously, especially when we're in post-colonial settings, for example, and we have all these things and we're like, okay, how did these things come to be? Well, these are aspects of political theory. One thing I want to show is that, which we'll not have time to talk about, is the fact that a recent scholar by the name Zulfikar Ali Shah has actually showed something very, very marvelous that I've been very curious about. And as a student of political science, it was very, very interesting for me to see and study these ideas and be like, okay, there are either two things. Either this man plagiarized from Revelation one way or the other, or the human mind is a genius for people to sit down, firstly develop these ideas, and then go about developing a constitution that can develop a society like this. And we're going to ask, why is this kind of success happening? Because for me as a Muslim, I like to ask, okay, why would God give certain people success? For me, that I claim to believe in you more than them, we don't have it. Is it that they had their own separate revelation, or is it that something happened? Well, first and foremost, when Europe was in a period of darkness, Thomas Aquinas benefited from Ibn Rushd, and that is a well-known And Ibn Rushd, I believe, emerges within the 1100s, I believe, in Andalusia. So what I'm trying to say is that Muslims should be proud of the fact that people cannot just tell them that they should go back home when their own civilization of Tawheed informed this progress that is happening down there one way or the other. So a lot of things were translated into Greek languages. And the likes of Locke especially is unknown to us, but could have even had a way of even being a silent Muslim within a Trinitarian space. Firstly, he was not a Trinitarian. He evolved in faith, but he was very, very critical one way of the society and, of course, the kind of religious milieu. And we now understand, based on the works of Zulfikar Ali Shah, that he actually had an intimate level of engagement with Arabic, and the fact that he traveled, him and Isaac Newton definitely had engagement with the resources. So the European experience, or the Western civilization, is not just a product of Western exceptionalism or Western ingenuity. We need to be proud and shake up that cognitive dissonance that they are trying to put inside us. So that is the brief overview of liberalism for now. But liberalism doesn't just exist like that. Liberalism cannot just walk in a society and just say, okay, give me freedom and we'll just move forward like that. you have to move something. You have to have troops to move certain things. You have to have some sort of authority or power, you understand? And again, liberalism does not just come from the vacuum. Remember that it's trying to solve a problem and it's trying to preserve certain rights. People have been oppressed, you understand? Martin Luther has brought us glory. How do we preserve this kind of glory based on how we've come so far? So this is where secularism as a worldview and as a religion of the state comes. Firstly, we're speaking of secularism as a religion because anthropologists like Talal Asad have come so far and done a lot of research to prove that really secularism is not just an idea, it's not just a system of just say politics, but it's a way of segmenting a set of values and a set of things that can be marginalized and say this is what we're going to allow and this is what we're not going to allow. So the idea of religion, in fact, as a terminology, can be a problem for those of us that are Muslims, because the idea of religion, while it can have different definitions, the way the European sees it is different from the way Muslims see it. The way a Muslim sees it is deen, and deen means everything, encompasses everything from the east to the west to the north to the south. The way you interact, the way you do other things fall under deen. Also, the way you wear your clothes, the mindset you do when you're going out of the house and you're going to work. It's not just about rituals and values and certain things. Whereas religion creates a segmentation that puts it in that kind of box, and that is a problem for us. So when you're going out, when you see people reacting and be like, oh, they don't want religion, they don't like religion, it's because they have a trauma or a baggage that has been going as far back as 4 centuries. And we are supposed to not yield to them, but say, wait, firstly, the idea of deen is more than just that. Basically, we have mu'amala, we have ibadah, but they are all encycling themselves. The Prophet was sent to perfect good character. And that means a lot more than just doing your 5 daily prayers and ticking the box of rituals. Because if you're ticking the box of rituals, then yes, you can still be a Muslim in a secularist environment. But how does this thought evolve? So political liberalism of Locke had a role to play. And we will talk about that, because political liberalism does not mean that there is no God especially because these people were Christians to an extent, to a very deep extent, actually. They were still Christians. But there's an evolution. We now move to the 18th century. So Locke is in the 17th century, I believe. Or we've now moved to the 18th century. And then we're having discussions with people like John Stuart Mill. You understand? And Stuart Mill, and the reason we're holding this name is because certain ideas come in a different way. So remember Locke said, give us rights to freedom or liberty, property, and pursuit of happiness, basically. You understand? And some of these tenets are definitely things that you can trace back to our own Sharia, one way or the other, because it was deliberately put in that way. So Mill is coming out to be like, wait a second, we've already Locke has defined the purpose of government, you understand? But the purpose of government is to allow for the greatest level of happiness for the greatest number of people. Hence, the state has the authority to intervene in actions of individuals only if the actions are causing harm. This is where the principle of harm now comes. So what is the principle of harm? If my mosquito is not biting you, please do not kill it. If your house is on fire, so long as it doesn't touch me, you understand? Ideally, that is not a problem. But the government has to intervene because I know that fire is going to burn your house. So if it's going to burn your house, it's going to come to my house. This is the mindset that starts to develop. So when we now talk about ideas of abortion today, when we now talk about the ideas of certain types of morality being legitimized in society, it's under the principle that we've not proven successfully that harm is in the way for us. If there's harm, then fine, we'll stop it, but there's no proof that there's no harm, that there's harm, in those kind of things in general. So it falls under the right of freedom. And so we have a right of freedom, we should have a right of pursuit of the ultimate happiness. This is how we're reading today Stuart Mill, even though Stuart Mill did not intend for this progressive level of what some people or religionists will call decadence, basically. The Republican today will say, no, we're classical liberals. Let's go back to what our forefathers understood. You understand? Now, for John Rawls liberalism now brings in the form that defines secularism properly. And then he says, firstly, going back to our own forefathers, basically, of course, concept of separation of church and state is essential. It's an essential aspect of liberal democracy. And I hope we understand why there's a separation of church and state. We're separating church and state because the church is a problem. The church was a problem. The church was in our businesses too much. The church was dictating our businesses too much. So now that we have independence, especially of the Catholic Church, when they say church and state, they're thinking around the Catholic Church, especially if because the Catholic Church has a broad level of definition of morality, definition of ethics. And that is why the worldview template that I shared earlier is very, very important when we talk about ontology, epistemology. The epistemology of Christianity, for by and large, since the conquest of the Roman Empire on over Christianity, was tied to giving the Catholics the power to dictate certain things. But by and large, before then, Christianity didn't have a way. Jesus was not a politician or was not a leader. So he didn't define politics the way Islam may define politics. They didn't define certain level of organization of society. So that is where the Catholic Church steps in with the power and the ideology of the Roman Empire. Here, liberalism is saying we're putting step to the church, but we have our own vision. Rawls' vision is that the one where the state is neutral with respect to religion, and where individuals are free to make their own choices about religious beliefs and practices. This is where secularism is now born officially. So I'll be fast from this point in forward, I hope. And then, so we just want to understand secularism. I give credits to Arkham Institute and Sister Dania. For this, I had to just go with this form and template and just move forward with this. We're understanding what secular is. Secular, in of itself, the terminology of secular is a different world and is a different word entirely from secularism, although it informs it. So secular thought creates a clear, distinct distinction between the worldly and the temporal sphere of life. So within this aspect, I don't even need to have to talk about what Islam says or Islam does not say in a separate slide. I can actually be rebutting it from this perspective. When we think about our own existence, we're not people who secularize our own environments in general. We have the role of religion. The role of religion is in every single sphere, including politics. The only thing is it doesn't have a fixed, clear-cut mandate. If you're subject to what kind of environment you're living or not, or maybe you're outside of a caliphal authority, for example, but it defines that. Generally, we see the practice of the prophet. We model the practice of the prophet in general, even though the prophet did not ascribe himself as a politician in any way, because everything was in harmony. His religious duties were a form of worship. His political duties were a form of worship. His social relationship was a form of worship. So this idea of the city of God is separate from the earthly city comes into the fold. So now the problem is we're always thinking of secularization as the mere separation of church and state. Well, it has evolved past that already. It's everywhere now. It's not just the separation of church and state. So, and the ideology that originates within a specific Western Christian context with the hopes of preserving peace among Christians and curtailing the power of the corrupt Catholic Church. So, in summary, and when we move into other sites, you will see how it's more than just a situation of church and state. What secularism does is simple. We have this land, we have these people who are separating. We're going to end up deciding what level of religiosity they can have, basically. That is what secularism does in of itself. And I'll speak about more in the next slides, basically. The goals of secularism: to put the church and all forms of religious symbolism in its place, or we call it at the back of the bus. It emerges as a result of historical trauma and baggage of religion in Europe. It was propped up by the role of reason and empiricism in the Enlightenment Europe. So the Enlightenment thinkers of Locke and co. were gifted with the power of thinking for their people, and the evolution of science in the environment thanks to the likes of Isaac Newton and co. And that determined the fact that they started to see things away from revelation. So revelation, when we looked at the modern worldview, we rediscovered that they didn't have revelation in their own framework because they cut off revelation and they focused on the other human gifts or the other godly given human gifts in general. The term secularism emerges way even after secularism has already been properly formed in 1851. And that was even as a substitute for terms like atheism, free thinker, and things like that. And so one thing that is very interesting is that what we call secular liberalism is actually unique to our societies of the West than in other societies. And this is where I will now start adding contexts to play. I'm not sure whether I will have a space to add more context to play, but let me just put a discussion point here. If you look at places like Nigeria today, when the colonialists came into power, they came with their missionaries. And when they came with their missionaries, they didn't found a system of Islam in the southern components of, or the southern parts of the country. They didn't find a system in place. But when they went to the north, there was a system in place. So that now meant that they had to engage in those systems in place in a different way. So northern Nigeria and as well the West African region of what was called Belad Sudan, with no border lines at that time, had a robust form of Maliki Islam being shared around those regions. But when you now look at what the state did in that situation, it partook in a secular kind of project whereby, maybe because it was jealous that Christianity didn't have others, it superimposed a penal code that stripped out most of the religious laws or the what we would call the hudud, basically, and then started to put in small form of penalties and be like, okay, you're just going to be sentenced to prison for this. You're just going to do that. This is what we now call penal code. It instituted it in not just in northern Nigeria, but in Sudan also, and in other places. This is what secularism does. It now determines what it's going to do for certain things. So the nature of a nation state today, that you say, okay, I'm Nigerian, I'm Ghanaian, I'm Senegalese, is a construct of the European nation state. It is like just implanting an idea from Europe and then putting it down on ground for whatever agenda they want to agenda, and then just giving the people and say, okay, just manage and drive whatever you did not construct yourself, and just be hitting and killing and go until you reach your destination. So this is the mindset, basically. I'm interested in talking about American secularism in general. And the only thing I missed here is not it's the only thing I missed here, what I would say is not mentioning, it's not particularly mentioning some of the quotes of some of the secularists, some of the founding fathers of the American Constitution. But I've given an example here. This is a quote by, I don't know who exactly stated this, but I know the likes of James Madison, Samuel Adams, and co. definitely informed the Constitution with their own Christian beliefs, one way or the other. And it's important to say this because today, when people are bashing Republicans, they forget the fact that, no, it wasn't just an atheist kind of secularism that gave birth to America. Actually, most secular countries that are compatible with religion today are following more American styles of secularism. And so, as irrespective of how Christian America may be today, which is less Christian than before, because it still maintains that one nation under God, it comes back with a supposition that believe that, you know what, we don't need to write religion on every single artifact of our Constitution. We're all Christians, so we know how to govern ourselves. So long as the Catholics are not here, and every other person knows that we agree on ourselves, our morals and our beliefs are what we have today, basically. And that is what it is. That is what it is. So we don't need to say, okay, no LGBT, no, of course, they said no Black people, obviously, you understand? But that is a special level of discrimination. So, okay, everybody else, we're all equal except Black people in general. So you can see how that kind of secular mindset, dictating, having some level of God kind of powers, but still maintaining a level of Christianity in that aspect to drive the society, which kept it stable. French secularism is, on the other hand, was a very, very radical one. After the Revolution, French Revolution, taking out the king, they went straight for the jugular, went for the Catholic church, went for the Catholic priests and slaughtered them, basically. The numbers, you can just go to Wikipedia and just read that. So it's known as the Reign of Terror. But what did it do? French secularism actually displayed proper level of taking Christians or taking the leadership of Christianity back to the boss by saying, you know what, we're going to de-Christianize the Catholic leadership, but it's going to be under the state. So the religion is under the state and taking salary to an extent till today in that house under the state. So when we look at the fallacy of secularism and firstly of liberalism, first and foremost, we're saying something. Surah Jathia says, have you not seen the one that has taken his Lord as his desire, basically? And and then God allowed him to be misguided and then sealed his ears and the other parts of his sensory perception. And who is going to guide them other than God? Afala tazakkarun. Can't you reflect, maybe, one way or the other? Or can't you remember, basically? And so liberalism comes in as something that validates the nafs, basically. It comes from me first and then projects to society. That is where the Descartes kind of mentality that says, I think, therefore I am, comes to be. And then the principle of no harm comes to be. And then when you have a chaos in society and you have too many ideas, it says that the way that secularism can solve that problem is through public reason. So you're going to have to justify it. But you're going to justify it without saying God said this. So if you want to ban LGBT, you cannot ban it on the basis of the Bible or the scripture. You're going to say, God, you're going to say, this is the reasons why, these are the reasons why. You have to bring empirical facts to it. Now, there's a new ideology in the West called postmodernism that is trying to kick that out to say that, okay, everything is relative. The idea of truth is relative. Empiricism or scientism is saying that, no, we have to have the facts first. We're not going to have something that somebody just said somewhere in heaven, basically. And so when we're seeing this, we're seeing that secularism is partaking in a power struggle with the society or with religion in of itself, basically. So it's a push and pull according to other experts. Again, this screenshot is from an Arkham Institute, basically, and credits to Sister Dania on this one also. And so we see the level of coercion that happens within the state itself. It's Talal has to say it's precisely in a secular state where it's supposed to be totally separated from religion that it is essential for the state and law to define again and again what genuine religion is and where its boundaries should be properly put. I'll give you an example. Today, you are seeing in British society, they are allowing people to eat dates and break their fasts. That is because secularism has chosen to tolerate that in Britain. Compared to France, France is saying, no, we don't want that. We're not going to even allow you. You can see this is why understanding the roots of secularism is very important. Compared to some Arab countries right now that some people cannot even hold their beard, basically. Those ones, they don't even have a liberal secularism. They're having something worse than that. They're having a dictatorial secularism in their framework in general. And then because it wants to regulate and control religion, it now uses associations. Today in the post 9/11 era, we're having things like counter-violent extremism, agenda saying that you have to promote a certain kind of Islam, of moderate Islam, of certain kind of Islam, and that beliefs and opinions are all equal in values. So you have the idea of the nones and the ones in general in society. We're rounding up, inshallah. And so the assumed points and benefits of secularism and liberalism, very few that I have here. Secularism will tell you that it is preventing violence. Well, we don't even need to use Islam to refute that. Firstly, when you count the number of people that died in World War I and World War II, you go back and then you now start adding the other deaths that have happened in the last 300 or 400 years by virtue of the nation state. You will know that it has surpassed the million mark, has surpassed the religious wars that have happened prior, whether it's by Islam and other engagement with Christianity or other things. So that is self-refutable in of itself. Like, look at just what Hitler did, basically, in Europe, in just Europe. And then you talk about the universal rights and morality based on individual right, because it assumes that because we're individuals, therefore, the ideas that we have today about our self-autonomy, autonomy is a key word, right to self-regulate ourselves, self-determine ourselves, if you want to even use that from a nation-state perspective, extends to communities in Yoruba land, extends into communities in Senegal that have their own level of society that have been governing, or extends to communities in Asia. And this is very, very ridiculous. You understand? Because it doesn't work that way. It never worked that way. And that is why you had those kind of clashes. And that is why even in places in which the nation state has emasculated by virtue of violence, you still have clashes in those kind of environments, whether it's in Somalia, whether it's in South Sudan, whether it's even in, I mean, we're seeing it in other areas of West Africa today. And you can see those kind of conversations happening in Nigeria up till today. Basically, you still have those issues. Now, look at the hypocrisy of those universal rights. When those rights were trying to be promoted in Egypt through democracy, some certain organs of universal rights and United Nations did not intervene to stop the coup from happening down there. So really, it's not really that universal, except universal for a few people. You talk about promotion of agency and exclusive nationality. Yeah, that is something I just touched about, giving the example of Egypt and the coups that happened. You understand? When Thomas Sankara is coming out to say that we're upright men, we're Burkina Faso people, you shoot him down because he doesn't meet your standards of autonomy, basically, one way or the other. And so our idea is that, firstly, as Muslims, God has created us as men, women, into tribes and small nations so that we get to know each other. Because of that composition, our currency is taqwa, first and foremost. So it's not about the identity monikers that we face. And this is why it's very important that those of us, especially in the milieu of talking to ourselves about Southerners, Northerners within the Nigerian milieu, need to have to rethink ourselves. Because you're a Southerner to the exclusion of another Muslim at the other side of the aisle. Or are you a Northerner to the exclusion of Muslims at another side of the aisle, basically? How do you perceive if you claim to be a Southerner, how do you perceive an Igbo Muslim? You understand? Claim to be a Northerner. How do you perceive an Igbo Muslim? How do you perceive those other multiple tribes that are not there? You understand? You go to Saudi today, or you go to Malaysia today, you are a Nigerian Muslim, therefore you cannot have that passport, compared to being in an Ummah or in a caliphate whereby you are able to go to Jerusalem, cross Jerusalem, and you come back, basically, because your identity as a Muslim allows you for that in that aspect. Fostering tolerance and neutrality. Everybody is tolerant today. The world, Europe is tolerant, according to them, until a Muslim with a cap shows up or until a niqabi shows up. Well, historically, in the Muslim world, contrary to popular perception, we don't have that experience. Jews grew very well in Andalus. They've written and appreciated the fact that Muslims were tolerant of them until the Crusaders came and killed them in there. In general, an important fact that people do not know from a book in Richard, I think Richard Bullitt, says that when Islam conquered the regions of Syria and Spain, it took almost 6 centuries for Muslims to properly encompass them in population. What am I saying? I'm saying that Abu Hanifa grew the Hanafi madhab as a minority in Iraq, while Christians were still majority in Syria and co. The likes of Awzai, Islam flourished in an environment where it was the authority, but it still had majority Christians. And he shows this kind of statistics in his book. So the idea of tolerance, we're not just marketing it enough, simply because we're putting Tawheed first and not tolerance. Moreover, secularism has Judeo-Christian roots, first and foremost, and can be very intolerant, as we've seen in France, and very ruthless outside of Europe, as we've seen in other so-called nation states that are claiming to be Muslims and having dictatorships, because they know that giving people agency means that their rights will be gone. I have a few more slides and I'm done. Consequences of secularism on Islamic community. For me, this is where it touches me deep, very, very deep personally. And I speak as somebody, as a child, who was very, very enthusiastic about always seeing the harmony between Islamic knowledge and what I'm doing. If I'm seeing chemistry, how does God dictate the ideas of atoms going around? What are the universals that make atoms flourish? Those kind of things are questions that I'm asking. And it's not a question for somebody to be belittled about, because this can affect their theology. This can affect their orientation. Because if you're putting people in a pipeline of school to work pipeline, and then they grow old, what are they contributing to? Well, they are not contributing anything to an Islamic community other than other than preservation of it, but it's not taking them to a standard of excellence, of spiritual excellence. That means they are serving their corporate organs and they are serving the nation state. And that is exactly what the nation state wants. So Ibadah is now tied to choice, so long as we give you the permission to go and pray and come back. So that's it. Islam addresses all aspects of lived experience, both the individual and the collective in general. And so thanks to Sister Dania again with this, she itemizes it very well. We're looking at Ibadah sometimes as choice, hijab as choice, as opposed to hijab as servitude. When Rabi'i bin Amr went to Persia and he was standing in front of Rustum as a very, very frail commander who was sitting down in front of the largest empire in the world, arguably. And he said, we're here to liberate the people from their servitude to you to a servitude to God, first and foremost. And so centrally, Islam is submission, basically. So we're going out of work, we're taking out our prayer breaks, we're getting money, we're getting it to flourish the society more and more. ليس البر أن تولوا وجوهكم قبل المشرق والمغرب. Ayatul Bir covers this. It's about belief first, and then going and make that belief function in society. Secularization of knowledge, it's what it is. One cannot say it, but I'll just give you an example of how knowledge was not secularized. Al-Khawarizmi, in his introduction to his book on algebra, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm not mistaken, if he's the one that produced algebra, in the introduction, you see all of them saying that they produced this knowledge because they wanted to solve a problem in the Islamic community. Algebra was tied to the solutions of zakah today. It's not just these thinkers. Even in West Africa, I've seen manuscripts of our own scholars do the same thing when they're developing calculus, when they're developing some of these concepts. They are thinking around what purpose are we serving to the Ummah, one first and foremost, as opposed to just a material purpose of capitalistic nurture, one in of itself. And so the perspective when you're studying a chemistry book should be different than when you're studying something else, when you're studying geography. And so I appreciate my high school, of course, for bringing in the idea of Islamic perspectives, but you have to have something that is embedded within the DNA of the courses that you're going in. A student is going in with a sense of tadabbur and is coming out with a sense of tadabbur. And by and large, you can see the effects of this colonialism and secularization affecting the compartmentalization of Islam in our curriculum, basically. Somebody listening to this lecture today will be like, this lecture is not spiritual. But how is it not spiritual, for crying out loud? For crying out loud, you understand? That is the effect of compartmentalization of Islam. Islam is just Islamic studies. But the 12 other courses down there that you're taking, English, physics, maths, and all those things, they have no ayat of reflection that can make us become contributors as opposed to consumers of society. So each time we're going to end up coming to run to the scholarship to be asking them for things that we should be able to ideally resolve if we have the framework to govern, and then bring in higher level of issues to the scholars, because the scholars do not also have the full knowledge of what you're facing. And this is as a result of compartmentalization of Islam compared to an era of Al-Ghazali. Al-Ghazali grew up 20, 25 years studying the same level of sciences, whether it's medicine and and things like that, with the Islamic sciences that we're calling Islamic sciences today. So what is the ideal polity? I'm not going to talk too much about that for now, because it's something that we should ask ourselves when we say, when the Prophet says, it's talking about the fact that the best generations were the Sahaba, and then the ones that followed after them and the ones that followed after them. Why are they the best? That's the question we should ask. You understand? So it's a succession. What I've defined it here is that it's a succession and a custodian of the prophetic message. It is a representation of the goal and the aspirations of the Ummah. Remember, it's God that called us an Ummah. Unity is of utmost importance. And that unity is what gives us the idea of championing somebody that we're going to put as our leader. Hence, a Khalif is called an Amir al-Mu'mineen, and it's not called a king in general. And then Ayatul Bir makes us prosper in that aspect. I put in this ayah of Muhammad is not a messenger. messengers have passed. Muhammad is not but a messenger. Sorry, messengers have passed on before him. So if he was to die or be killed, would you turn back on your heels? And he who turns back on his heels will never harm Allah at all, but Allah will reward the grateful. This ayah was revealed at Uhud, when the message of the Prophet being dead happened. When the Prophet actually died, Abu Bakr uttered this when there was a state of chaos. And he said, this is the reality. What are you guys going to do? So for us, we're standing here, and he kept to his word. So he kept to that word, and he reunited the Ummah upon the Ridda Wars, upon the victory of the Ridda Wars, basically, to show that. And that legacy building is what we're supposed to keeping on, from a perspective of saying that, okay, we need a united body that can nurture our Islam, that can nurture our sense of excellence, because Surah Al-Baqarah again says, we've created you as a median nation, as a middle nation, to be a witness upon the people. So how do you achieve that? That is the question we should be asking ourselves. My second to last slide, ecosystems and the impact of secularism and liberalism on our American mosques. I'm starting from America first before we go out, because we really do not appreciate the fact that our children are children of the Enlightenment, post-Enlightenment, if they are born on the soil, meaning they grow up in an environment in which they feel they are autonomous. Every Black child today that responds to the police in a way whereby he doesn't feel subjugated is a child of the Enlightenment, because the authority is not supposed to discriminate on him. He is an equal child to the white man according to the Constitution, at least finally. So why are you supposed to pick him away from that mindset? So when we discriminate and we're saying, while we're worrying about how certain cultures respond to the police as opposed to the other way around, we have to ask ourselves, what are the foundational assumptions and presumptions of the culture that he has gone through? That is the oxygen that is in the atmosphere. It's an oxygen of freedom. It's an oxygen of pursuit of liberty. So why should you limit my liberty and my rights and my cause to seek happiness? This is the crisis of racism in an American context in of itself. So liberalism, I see liberalism for me as a sort of independent dopamine that just comes out. It can be a form of hawa, but it can be a form of recognizing that we have to have certain rights in place. It started off from a political perspective that was very good until it devolved into entering the social realm and trying to determine harm according to how you feel. Hence, it's limiting the role of religious authority. So the impact of it in our masajids is that people will rightly come out and start disrespecting their imams. They will not see the responsibilities of their imams. You see activists being more popular than their imams in the community. What else? Collective interests are going to be subjugated over personal interests. We want to win election. We have to get this particular person so that he can win election and preserve our integrity so that we can have certain level of rights. We can have certain level of funds. We can have certain level of things and other funny commitments, basically, that we see. Pushing the role of religious authority to the back. Why can't we have music in the masjid? Why can't we have weddings where we throw music in the masjid? Forgetting the fact that there is a consensus around us that we need to protect the dignity of the masjid in certain ways. You have this kind of questions that people will ask, but why? As opposed to, what has God put for us? So liberalism is starting from the individual and going outwards. And I'm talking about liberalism today and not liberalism in a time of Locke, but it has evolved into this level. When the Constitution is being read to favor some certain rights, it's being read in a level of progressive liberalism. So personal interest, you're looking at the right of the interest first before right of the state. People are not trying to wear masks. They're saying, okay, it's my own individual right first. State should not make me to wear my mask, despite the fact that we have COVID. And then utilization of public reason over Sharia compliant principles. Then you now say, okay, we're not going to use, but the Quran was revealed 1,400 years ago. It doesn't have relevance today. What is relevant is what we see and what we can perceive. Therefore, a child born into certain societies should have a right to change their gender at any time. They should have a right to cross-dress. They should have a right to pierce any part of their body, because it's my body first. It's my own autonomy first before any other thing else. When we look at the secularism, the way secularism is framed, it now pollutes the atmosphere, because When secularism exists, then other parts of the society can have postmodernism, feminism, where it reacts to patriarchy and says, I want to be a servant of the state or the servant of the corporate world, but not the servant of my husband, basically, in that aspect. Postmodernism, truth is relative. Scientism, science first before any other thing else. That is what secularism brings. So Sherman Jackson will say apathy, religious apathy born out of irrelevance is worse than persecution. You find people having an Orwellian mindset whereby you tell them 2 + 2 is 5. And if you don't agree to it, they smack them. And then they have to agree that 2 + 2 is 5. So you're now trying to change your religion to agree that 2 + 2 is 5. This is the ideology of the day today. It now diminishes the role of the mosque compared to the Medinan era. Our role, the masjid cannot become a relic as an institution, basically. It's a role of bringing in the ummah as a community. But this is what secularism will allow our children to push one way or the other. And so religion is nobody's mindset. After you've separated the church and the state, you understand the mindset now dictates and violates the sanctity of the religious relics. You can come in to the masjid without decorum, without comportedness, and anybody can just walk in and walk out. Basically, you bring in a celebrity who does not recognize Islamic values because it's religion. Religion is now privatized, basically. And then the displacement of religious norms in socialization of culture and arts and human interaction. So we have ibadah and we have mu'amala, but they are not there to be separate categories. They are there so that we have to understand that certain things are an absolute right of God and other things God has allowed us unless he has stopped us. So on a good day, wearing tattoos is not a worship thing, but God has stopped us from doing that. You understand? We can go and seek our means of wealth. It's not a bad thing, but we have to not take riba. Secularism breaks that out of the way in general. You understand? So, and that is what it is. The final points, I know I've gone past the hour mark. When I look at my community and I'm looking at certain things, I'm looking at the state of everybody else. We need to see ourselves within our vantage point, but with a worldview that can bring us into a form of unity, whether it can happen in our lifetime or not. Not unity for the sake of unity, but unity for the sake of prosperity, spiritual prosperity. What the nation state does in general is that, and before I did this, I know we spoke about the introduction of the segment, spoke of religion as something that has actually segmented people. But we're understanding this now because it is the nature of what the nation state has done. The nation state has radicalized Christianity to even become worse than before. Hence, Christianity is reacting in different spaces, whether it's in the Republican Party or in places whereby it's having evangelicals just misbehave. Looking at the context of the Nigerian elections and the way it tried to sponsor religious apathy. Religious apathy, but true religious bigotry, sponsor religious bigotry, and then which will further lead to religious apathy very soon. Because when you speak to my own friends that are Nigerian Christians, they will tell you they are disenchanted with Nigerian Christianity. And that is a big problem, a very big problem, because when you become disenchanted with religion, the next place is either deism or atheism. And atheism, while it's just going to be a fracture, deism will be to say that, okay, I believe in God, but I don't believe in religion. So we're now creating new enemies for those of us that are Abrahamic. So we have the crisis of liberalism, but we now have a crisis of submission to anything, going back to what liberalism wants to promote. So it's important that when we look at our own communities that are still battling to develop themselves, let's just say the post-colonial states of West Africa, for example, an increasing secular state don't mean that people are less religious. They are basically transferring their religiosity or commitment to something else. So people will become, even if people are less religious, they are taking their spirituality to something else. A woman that is going to work with no family, no child, and said family is not a priority, she has found her working place as a spiritual environment, basically. So it's just a transfer of energy from one place to another in general. And yes, we have nation states that we still have the same conservative values that can nurture the community. But the reality of the nation state is that it's going to get worse as time goes on because it's tradition. People will continue to question traditions for the sake of it. or they will say, okay, this was relevant back. You had this Great Wall of China. Why don't we just destroy it? The next generation will come. The same way the next generation is owning phones, the next generation will say, okay, I mean, we don't need phones now. We have AI. We can pray Tarawih with AI, and that is it. But if you don't have something concrete to be like, okay, what are the demarcations? This is what God wants from us. How do we engage with this? What we are supposed to understand is that in these environments that are very, very chaotic, let's just say having half Muslim, half Christians, it's important that we are not reactionaries and we understand the fact that some of these people have a trauma that they didn't subscribe for themselves. And we are now the ones that are supposed to be the vehicle to not play into the stereotype. So firstly, we have to accept the realities of religious trauma, even within the Muslim community also. We have kids that are becoming atheists. We put them in that same school to prosper. Well, our parents prospered doesn't mean that we have to prosper, because at least back then they had values that could drive them to another level, to at least prosper with money. But when prosperity comes, you're going to keep asking questions. What is the purpose of your existence? And so if you don't see any tangible benefits, you're not seeing the Islam penetrating and you're just going there to just pray and you're coming back. People will not see the value of why you're praying unless you're integrating the fact that they are going to school for a particular purpose to serve a particular mission that is very, very integral to the prosperity of the message of God and his messenger. In that manner, when we're thinking of ourselves as being one identity or the other, we have to find new meanings to give to being Nigerian, being Ghanaian, beyond having jollof rice as our symbols, beyond having the Nigerian Army or the Super Eagles as our symbols. Yes, these are good. Cultural production is very, very good.
Yeah.
But it has to be imbued with a sense of solidarity. And we see this with Morocco, with the way Morocco represented us well in the World Cup. This is the ummatic flair that we want, one way or the other, as opposed to adopting a term of you being a northerner versus a southerner rhetoric, which only further plays into the tribalism in which the Prophet has called Jahiliyyah and other things. You're not firstly helping the dawah of the messenger, because the people who you see as your opponents, if they are non-Muslims, for example, isn't it your sense of mindset to want their children to become Muslim? Are you simply just going to react as a victim to them as opposed to see how the Prophet reacted to the people of Taif? It takes a level of emotional intelligence to move from plan A to plan B, but we have to start thinking around that. And so emulating prophetic patience and a mindset for more aggressive dawah in the face of Judeo-Christian and secular Islamophobia is very, very important. We have to think strategies one way or the other. It's not everything that we have to be combative about, but we have to be aggressive. And that is something that you learn from the Prophet, that until they chose to kill him, he didn't leave the Meccan environment. He took the weak people, moved them out, but he kept on strategizing, trying to build allyship. And then lastly, making our identity serve taqwa and ummatic unity is very, very important. And goes back to the verse of Surah Hujurat, we've created you into tribes and nations. I think I'll put a pause here. I think I've gone way past, and I'll let Sheikh take spring. There are other quotes that I could have shared, but I think I will let him.
I mean, I'm just in a philosophy class. I'm enjoying the whole flow. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. We thank Ustaz Ayatollah Muhammad. The topic we have been treating in the last approximately an hour is secularism and liberalism. I find it difficult to pronounce that word. Liberalism and Islam. So we did a comparison. He kind of explained the difference to us by comparing the present American society, the African society, the 18th centuries, and the rest, and up to the present time. So we all understand. I believe I have been following the lecture. I've been sitting here very attentive, following the lecture slide by slide, and I believe many of our listeners and viewers are also doing the same thing. Unfortunately, we are. I know it's almost time for iftar for those of us in the East Coast, but I want to just. I need you to make some clarification. So, and Well, not really clarification, kind of a question. And, you know, the liberalism, like you stated, is at some point you kind of define it as this principle of no harm. If I'm doing something that is not affecting you, then that's my own human right, right? So the question is, does human right have a limit? According in the Islamic context, does it have a demarcation, a boundary? You came up with the analogy of fire, right? So if my house is, I was realize, fire, fire is burning. If the fire is not taken care of, it could escalate, and every house in that neighborhood could get burnt down. So now, how the question is again: is there a limit to freedom as human?
Definitely, there's a limit to freedom as humans now. And just think about it. You have a child. Generally, you put a child to just play around. She's playing around a defined boundary. Once she goes to the boundary and then she starts walking towards the kitchen, let's say she's in the parlor, you are going to start looking. And if she's walking towards the stove, you're going to have to put something down there in general. Naturally, that is how that is how God has partitioned halal and haram for us in general. So, and he says, so, and then whoever walks into certain things, then they've walked into haram. It's just better you stay away from it. To properly answer the question, we have rights and responsibilities in Islam.
Yeah.
So in Islam, the problem with liberalism today is that it focuses too much on rights and doesn't look at how rights and responsibility has to roll around in general. And so they have to do all those freedoms have to be Sharia compliant also to make sure that it doesn't violate the tenets of God and his messenger. So by and large, the charters that were coined in my own opinion, from the UN resolutions, for example, of human rights in 1945, they were not anything spectacular. They were just borrowing back to what the other centuries have done, which were, many of them were Sharia compliant. It's when you're now acting upon them, how do you go about it? So what progressive liberalism has done, when you look at the sexual revolution and things like that, is that it has said, you know what, these freedoms we have, we're going to go about it to maximize it to the highest level of happiness. So when you look at feminism, sexual revolution said, if our own partners can have a right to intimacy outside of marriage, why can't we do so? As opposed to saying, no, wait first. Marriage is between a man and a woman, number one. Number two, anybody who does otherwise, you get the hand. You understand? And then, so you see Islam is putting those boundaries already. So Islam, that is why Islam is a moderate religion in of itself. And then every other thing follows through. According to cultures also, one thing that liberalism and the Western trauma does not understand is that Islam also is not just a rigid set of rules. When you go from one community or the other, you have ideals, but certain things can be changed or can be laxed so long as it's not part of the constants of the religion. Tawheed is a constant. 5 daily prayers is a constant. You understand? But in terms of saying, okay, should you pray nafila at what time or the other, whether in Japan or a certain thing, it depends. Those kind of things depend. Certain cultures also are allowed to shape the religious fabric of certain things. The kind of clothes you wear can be shaped by that. But civilization of the West did not have that level of enjoyment. That's why the Renaissance happened first. Before that is why the laws came, and there's too much focus on the laws before religion. So we're starting from the back. If you look at the template I give, while you're supposed to start from God up to morality and ethics and law and politics, we were starting from the law and we're going back. And so our kids are now asking, but why? But why? As opposed to what does God want from me? That is why theology is important. What does God want from me? As opposed to, but why is it not so? Why don't we have the right to dress anyhow we want? Why don't we have the right to walk out naked? Why don't we have the right to be boyfriends and girlfriends and things like that? So this is what the atmosphere of secular liberal ethics has put into being in general. And as it moves into conservative societies, it's just going to keep going on because the energy of the West is what is driving those societies. They are not neutral. It's through soft power, through liberal soft power, through liberal imperialism. These societies will now start changing. And so you have seen LGBT legislations in Africa. Some of them are banning it. Some of them are supporting it. Some of them are saying this. Some of them are getting this thing. Because this is the mindset that comes in general. So maybe hopefully I've answered your question.
Very well. You actually did. Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much. Jazakumullah khairan. And again, you see, you kind of said something like some will be like, oh, this is not spiritual. This is not. We can't just be talking about Tawheed and talk. We live in a society. We live in a secular state and all that. There are some things we need to understand in terms of our environment. So, and Islam as a religion is a total way of life. It covers everything. So there's no Islam left no stone unturned. So it actually touches everything. So
just to add, what we're talking about here is practical tawheed and not theoretical tawheed. So secularism and liberalism is anti-practical tawheed. It wants to confine tawheed to be what is in your heart, and then you sit it at home. But it doesn't have a problem putting Netflix and things that will be affecting your tawheed at home. So we have to be proactive. That's the point I'm trying to make, rather than just secularizing and doing things in that way.
Well said. Because even there's a group now, most especially in the West, and these are Muslim. They call them Muslim secularists. They have interpretation for everything. They're more or less like a scientist. The only thing they are here to criticize is just the existing of Allah. But everything about the Quran, about the Hadith, they have their own interpretation. And to your point, we're getting to that point. So it's gonna keep spreading and spreading and spreading. But again, Islam is about what does Allah say. Not why do I have to do it? Not the why and the why and the why. And that's, in the society we live in, we raise our kids. It's all about why. Daddy, why? Mommy, why? That's what the kids, that's always the question from the kids. They want to know the why behind every ask. Alhamdulillah, Rabbi Alameen. May Allah continue to increase you in beneficial knowledge. May Allah spare your life, answer all your dua. I really appreciate the time you have spent with us and with this beautiful presentation. This is really beautiful. Thank you so much. Jazakumullah khairan, and I hope our listeners do extend the same thing. At this moment, I wouldn't take much of your time because I know you reside in the East Coast and iftar is approaching. So
if there are any questions, I'm willing to answer. Don't worry, and I can send also the list of other.
I would like a copy of that slide, the presentation slides, please. I would like to have a copy. I think I would like to have a copy, and if anyone out there will also like a copy, let me know. I'll share. I'll send
a link of places that they can see where I got all the slides from. They're more elaborate 1 hour lectures for each and every concept. Don't worry.
Alhamdulillah. All right, so we will be drawing the curtain at this point. So with a beautiful closing dua from you. Bismillah.
ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع الدعاء وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم رب زدنا علما رب زدنا علما رب زدنا علما. Continue to bless our scholars, our teachers, our benefactors that have guided us, forgive us, provide for us, and accept our fasting, accept our acts of ibadah in the month of Ramadan. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك. السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. مع السلامة. Yeah. All right, so that's all we could take at this time. Inshallah, we will continue with our lecture. We have another interesting topic. This is a very interesting topic. I love topics like this. I wish we could have more of this, and maybe some other time, so that we can flow with everyone. Have it in both languages. So there you. I mean, I know you enjoyed. I really did. So inshallah, another beautiful topic tomorrow. We'll be looking at why does Islam allow polygamy? Why does Allah allows or Islam allows polygamy? So That's what we will be looking at tomorrow. So we'll take a trip to Nigeria. We'll take a trip to Nigeria tomorrow at about 5 p.m. So whenever we're going to Nigeria, due to the time difference, we will be starting the show 30 minutes earlier compared to when we have a guest here in the United States. So remember, we are Central, so West Coast. So we it's not time for iftar. We still have like an hour and some minutes before we could break our fast. I know my brothers and sisters in the East Coast, the weather has been very nice to you guys, so you guys can actually break at around 7:30 your time. 7:30 your time. So a few minutes to 8. Alhamdulillah, we thank Allah for the opportunity. We thank Him for sparing our life up to this moment. Again, let us meet Ustaz Imam Abdul Latif Abdullah As-Sudais. Will be our lecturer tomorrow, inshallah. And we will be looking. He actually wrote a book about polygamy. So I want to read that book as well. So we'll be promoting that book tomorrow, inshallah. So we'll promote the book. And if you're a book reader, you love reading, then you want to be my guest tomorrow, inshallah. My name is Muhammad Qasim. I'm the anchor, the host of Ramadan Special on Radio Al Muslimat and the Stink Radio. And I want to use this opportunity to thank all our sponsors, all our supporters. Jazakumullah khairan. May Allah reward you. May He accept all your charity, all the alms you give, all the support, the donations, and both morally, financially, and whichever form, may Allah reward you, because there's no other reward for who does good than good. Inshallah, may you reap the fruits of your charity here in this life and the year after. May Allah forgive our loved ones that have passed. May He grant us the best in this life and the best in the year after. Allahumma ameen. Ameen, ameen. All right, so this is where I am going to be turning my mic off until tomorrow, 5 p.m. tomorrow, inshallah. We will be looking at polygamy. Why does Allah Himself allows polygamy? Because Allah started when He said, we should marry. He said, and if you fear that you will not deal justly with the orphans girls, then marry those that please you of other women, 2 or 3 or 4. You see, Allah started from 2, and Nisa'i, well, my brother, my cousin, he say masna, awafaka, masna na hawa ka Allah, so masna efemeji, wasulasa efemeta, warubaha efemeri, lalawi. So this is going to be a very interesting topic. Most of our, you see, part of the matter why we're not going to be asking why. But again, just for the benefit of those that want to know the reason, the wisdom behind it, inshallah, I want to follow Atuba Diola, I want to share tafsiri, ayah yìí fún wa, Surah An-Nisa, Quran chapter 4 verse 3. Tí Ọlọ́run ní pé ká ṣe déédéé pẹ̀lú àwọn ọmọ òrukàn, pàápàá jùlọ àwọn obìnrin. Tàbá rí pé àwa lè ṣe déédéé pẹ̀lú wọn, kàfẹ́ méjì, kàfẹ́ mẹ́ta, kàfẹ́ mẹ́rin. Tàbá lè ṣe déédéé rárá nínú méjì, mẹ́ta, mẹ́rin, káwa dúró lórí ẹyọ kan ṣoṣo. Islam náà nìkan ló tún fún wa ní ló tún pa láṣẹ pé tó ká dúró lórí ẹyọ kan. So ẹni tó bá fẹ́ ẹyọ kan, súnà Ọlọ́run ló tẹ̀lé. Ẹni tó bá fẹ́ méjì, ara súnà Ọlọ́run náà ni mẹ́ta, mẹ́rin. Gbogbo wa náà ládìjọ ń ṣe súnà Ọlọ́run. Akíwa ní kìtọ́lá ìkìtì àwọn àlùjẹ́ náà, ohun tí a fi bẹ̀rẹ̀ ètò náà ni a fi ń dágbére fún wa pé ó tún di ọ̀la. Aago 5 òun náà ni ètò máa bẹ̀rẹ̀. Atọrọ gáfárà pé a bẹ̀rẹ̀ a little bit late lẹ́nìí. A lot of kọ́lọ́n kò ṣàánú kó gbà ní ìbádà. Ọlọ́run nípa à ń gbìyànjú náà ni sáré sọ́tún sáré sósì wọn gbogbo ẹ̀. Àmọ́ síbẹ̀síbẹ̀ àyè tọ́lọ́run ó dẹ̀ ń yọ. Ọlọ́run dẹ̀ ó ń ṣe tiwa, àná dẹ̀ à ń ṣe tiẹ̀, kò dẹ̀ fìgbà kan jáwọ́ nínú ọ̀rọ̀ wa. Ìyẹn náà ni a fi ń dúpẹ́ fún gbogbo ẹ̀yin ọmọ ìyá wa. Bí ṣe sọ, ẹ jẹ́ kí a pàdé tó bá di ọ̀la inshallah. Òun náà ni kí jẹ́ ká pàdé. Ẹ jẹ́ ń fi closing Nasheed Mitifi Wale, or Nana King Besoke Odara.
The stars praise him all day.